are more than 100 unique styles of beer, each with their own set of ingredients, process, guidelines, history, and experience. If you're a beer lover, an industry leader, or somewhere in between, a better knowledge of beer style will improve your life and your work.
Welcome to A Sense of Beer Style, essential beer style training for those who want to lead in food and beverage. I'm Julia Herz.
And I'm Jeremy Storton.
We're advanced Cicerones, beer judges, home brewers, and we're excited to guide you through the vast and wonderful world of beer styles.
Hey everyone, welcome back. This is going to be a fun episode. Julie, I'm so glad you're here. Hello, how are you?
I'm here, ready and fired up.
Oh man, I'm glad to hear that because I got to tell you a little story about the style. So for anyone listening, you're thinking, oh dear God, Jeremy's going to start telling another story. You're absolutely right.
That's why you're listening, people. I am ready for the story, Jeremy.
Right. So here we are. We are back in category 23. The European. We're in European sour ales. Our next stop on the European sour train is in East Flanders. We're going to talk about the Oud Bruin, or the Flanders Brown. So my first taste of this beautiful, beautiful style was there's actually a museum exhibit of the history of beer, and my wife and I went, and they had all these local breweries in Central Oregon down there sharing off their beautiful beer, and we visited all the exhibits and listened to the talks. And outside the talk, Deschutes Brewery happened to be there, and you know, a lot of these breweries were trying to share their usual suspects or their most popular IPA. You know, anyone who's kind of tired of going to Beer Fest and seeing the usual beers is like, okay, yeah, I've had it before. I'll have it, you know. But Deschutes showed up, and they brought out this beer that I'd never heard of before, and it was a style I'd never heard of before. I thought, okay, let's try it. I love Deschutes. And it was their dissident. It was their version of the Flanders Brown, or the Oud Bruin. And I think I had, 6 tokens for 6 beers. I think I used every single one to go back and get more of that. And since then, I've become a huge fan. So quick shout out to actually Larry Sador, who created this while he was at Deschutes. And of course, the people still making it. This is a beautiful, beautiful style, beautiful beer. I just had to give a little gratitude, but that was my entry into this beautiful version of this European sours, is this brown ale. These, you know, we think about Flanders, and if you're in Belgium, you know, a Flanders sour is a Flanders sour. They don't really differ between the two, but the BJCP does, because Michael Jackson did, and there are some differences, and we're going to talk about those. In another Stylecast, we did talk about the Flanders Red, but this is the Flanders Brown, Oud Bruin. This one tends to be more malty, tends to be stronger, tends to, instead of being aged in big oak foeders, this tends to be warm aged in stainless steel. Not 100% of the time, but there's a pattern there that just makes it different enough from each other. So that's just kind of like the entry point for this beautiful style. Let's talk about the ingredients that make it so wonderful.
I will. I love it. And this isn't a beer per se that you're going to see in as many homebrewers, kegs, and frankly, even craft brewers, breweries.
It'd be impressive if there were.
Right? Like, it's a complex beer. So to bring up Deschutes Dissident, and we'll talk about commercial examples besides that in a little bit, they are more few and far between. And old means aged, right? And the blending nature, because when we get to the ingredient portion of your beer studies for any style, it also has to do with process, is a marriage of usually kind of a fresh brewed version of this beer blended with an older version that's going to smooth out the complexity, or smooth out the flavors, but create more complexity. It's also going to bring sometimes an essence of barrel aged nature that maybe the newer one's not been influenced by, but the aged version has been laid down in oak or wood. So you're going to get this kind of pecking order in this beer style with Saccharomyces, the typical, yeast that we want to ferment our beers, but also you're going to get Acetobacter, maybe from the barrel it was exposed to, Lactobacillus, right? And you also have the essence of some water contributions that are going to kind of buffer the acidity of these darker malts. And in my studies, I've come to understand that carbonates and magnesium are typical water profile of kind of East Flanders in Belgium. And so that is what the water profile, if you are brewing these beers, is going to often introduce. And it actually has a purpose, and it plays well and balances that acidity. So, nothing dramatic, groundbreaking on the grain bill. The grain bill meaning the main fermentable. It's Pilsner malt, right? And then some dark crystal malts maybe will bring color, will bring some flavor, but don't bring a lot of additional fermentables. Maybe some maize or flake corn in there to give it a little body. And then some color malt potentially if they want to add some essence of getting the beer to be darker. So it's really not a advanced beer because of what is fermented. It's more of an advanced beer and complex beer because how it's aged, how it's conditioned. There's also essence of hops in the mix that are going to give it some low level hop flavor, not expected, but you could get some, especially in a fresher version, and much lower bitterness. So the bittering hops is going to be very, very low. That's a big part of it. And then these beers are often brewed as the base beer for fruited Flanders style beers, as Jeremy was pointing out with the Dissident. So you'd brew this and then you would blend in or age it even in trimary, a third version of fermentation with cherries, with raspberries and the like. And so it's a fun base beer, but then because you age it, because it's got influence from often wild organisms and oak aging and then fruit, boy, can you get a lot of variants of this one style.
Yeah. And the guidelines also talk about this as being warm aged, and I'm sorry, I was trying to verify this, and so I don't. I'm not 100% sure on this, but I believe, and Julia, you and I were talking about this beforehand. I believe this is the beer style that when they say it's warm aged, maybe they do stick it in oak barrels to age. But warm aging, I remember walking into a room where they had, I believe it was this style, where the room itself was like 90 degrees or probably like 37, 38 degrees Celsius. I mean, just like slightly above body temperature. And just to help the fermentable or the fermentation critters to really go to town on this stuff. So this is a very different thing. You mentioned homebrewing it. If there's any homebrewers that have attempted this and succeeded, high five all the way around. That's incredible because this is not. It's a very advanced beer to brew. But when we look at this beer, when we poured it into our glass, and I'm sorry, I'm for anyone watching, I don't have one now, but I've had plenty of these. We're going to pour this into our glass. What I expect to see on the average Oud Bruin is something that's kind of like a dark reddish, maybe just darker than copper, almost maybe like rust to brown. It should be quite clear, not always, but I expected to have a pretty good clarity. These have been sitting for a while, so unless you stirred the bottle and roused the yeast, it should be very clear. The foam on it, the BJCP guidelines mentions that can have a high head retention. I haven't seen one of those. All the ones that I've had, the head forms, it stays there maybe 60 seconds, and it's pretty much dispersed by then. But you do with it what you will. That's just my experience. The foam on it is usually kind of a light tan color too, but this glass, especially if you can shine a light behind it, is just a beautiful beer. But more importantly, we need to get into aroma.
Yes. So if you're holding one of these or plotting your next move to get one in your hand, you're going to look for the following aromas that are really indicative of the yeast and the characteristics of fermentation more than, say, the background base malts. Because Pilsner malt, for example, it's not going to jump out. You really are looking for some of this Saccharomyces or Lactobacillus or Acetobacter to express itself in the aroma. You're going to be looking for fruity esters. The style guidelines talk about even medium to medium high esters. Lots of fruit flavors in the array of what you could discern: raisins, plums, figs, dates, oranges, black cherries, or prunes. That's a really inviting list of esters. You might get an essence of that added crystal or caramel malt, a little bit of caramel, a little bit of toffee, or even treacle, which is kind of that UK or English brown sugar. And then you could get some phenols too. Belgian Saccharomyces yeast is famous not just for its esters, but its phenols. You want more peppery, like pink peppercorn types of phenols. You don't want it all the way to go towards Band-Aid. You might get a little vanilla or clove phenols, very low levels, but don't be surprised. And then the indicative notion that this beer is going to be sour. Sour is a basic taste. You can't smell sour, but you are going to get volatiles potentially from, say, that acetobacter and vinegar essence, right? Something that is, think cider vinegar type of aromas. Hops are basically virtually absent for aroma. And then the aged examples are going to express oxidation. That's okay. Oxidative qualities in many an aged beer is a good thing. Certainly has a shelf life, but sherry notes and the like, you don't want it to go towards cardboard or the other side of nasty oxidation. But oxidation and those sherry notes or dark honey could add to the complexity. And then that all falls and leads into our flavor.
And I have to commend you, Julia, because usually when people start talking about sourness or acidity within the aroma, we always kind of cover that ground very thoroughly. Is you can't smell sour. You can smell compounds that link your brain to memories of something that was sour you had once upon a time. But now when we get into the flavor, in another style cast, I kind of had to stop everything and just talk about the word complexity. And I think it was Flanders Red. I'm going to do the same thing, but shorter here. Complexity is a word we throw around far too often, but complexity should be your palate is overwhelmed, but in a good way, or your palate doesn't know where to begin, or your first thought is, holy moly, what is that? That is a sign that you're drinking something complex. And every one of these I've ever had has been very complex. Julia, you mentioned it in the aroma. That all translates over to the flavor. Now, this is a very malt forward beer, but the malt is balanced by acidity. The malt is balanced by complexity. And maybe in some cases, that malt is also balanced by tannins. That may come from the barrel if it's in a barrel, or maybe some other ingredients if they add something else in there, like cherry pits, for example. It's not common, but these are things that can help balance that malt bill. But we are looking for fruits like berries, not as in the actual fruit in the beer, but the flavors of berries, of dark dried fruits, of caramel, toffee, treacle, like you mentioned, is kind of like molasses, chocolate, orange, phenols, like peppery, interesting, just beautiful stuff. And then you start getting into the aged versions, a little bit of a sherry notes. And because of all these malt flavors and because of the acidity, your brain might actually take you to balsamic vinegar. Not in a bad way, not like you're going to make a salad out of this, although that would be amazing, but it does take you to a place where you're thinking, this is similar to balsamic vinegar, but in a liquid that I actually want to drink and consume. That is perfectly okay as well. Some of these, it says diacetyl is a little bit okay. I don't know that I've been able to pull out diacetyl from these. There's so much going on. I haven't keyed into one of those. Maybe I will now that I've said this. But when we talk about the finish and the balance, that is it's going to be extremely dependent on age, on the blend, on the brewer's or cellar person's hand and how they wanted this to manifest. So you could have the full gamut on this stuff. But that's a flavor. Let's get back into mouthfeel before I keep on waxing poetic.
Yeah, and it really is, I think, fun to listen to these episodes or watch us and have the
Yeah.
beer in your hand.
Oh
And
yeah.
and as Jeremy's talking, I mean, I'm just getting thirsty. I just want to confirm or deny everything he's telling me as I sip and taste it. And as we know, a part of what we're sipping and tasting is mouthfeel. Mouthfeel is a third
Yeah.
component of flavor. You have aromatic compounds, basic taste, and mouthfeel. So these are beers that have a broader spectrum of ABV range. We'll talk about that when we get to the vital statistics. So you can expect medium to medium full body. There's some girth there as it gets higher in ABV. And then the carbonation Jeremy mentioned, really they falter in a collar of foam. I think that collar foam that I've always seen does collapse quickly. So really low to moderate collar of foam is expected by style guidelines. I'm going to argue against no astringency in the mouthfeel for style guidelines because anytime you're going to have oak aging, you're going to get some polyphenols and tannins, but it's not a beer that's supposed to shout out and say, I was oak aged. Frankly, many people compare Oud Bruin to Flanders Red, which is another style, based on saying, well, Oud Bruin's traditionally fermented in stainless, right? And then Flanders is traditionally fermented in Folders oak aged. So you're not supposed to have a lot of astringency for sure, and big barrel essence, but the aged portion of this beer that's blended with the younger version will bring some, I think, of that barrel aging astringency, potentially weight on the tongue, that grippiness, and then some alcohol warmth depending on the ABV.
And in all fairness, that you made a great point. If we're in Belgium, they don't really separate the two. So to say that, oh, this one may have astringency and that one not because this is oak age and that's stainless age, there's going to be so much crossover and overlap that it's really hard to separate these out into two distinct uh, even teams. And this is an attempt at communication, not an attempt to tell you what is and what isn't. If just a quick reiteration there. Um, but that being said, what a great segue into style comparison. So let's just talk about, okay, we've got this Oud Bruin, there's the Flanders Brown. Let's just broad strokes. Let's compare this to European sours. Let's take like a Berliner Weiss or Gotha from Germany. Those are going to be finished or kind of fermented with a lactic acid bacteria. It's going to give it a very yogurty, lemony flavor, clean finish. This is not that. And when we talk about lambic or by extension a goose, that's going to be very depending on age, and we'll talk about that at different style casts. But depending on age, it can be quite tart. It can be less tart and more funky, and it's not going to have the same malt forwardness that any of the Flanders beers are going to have. So really, the only direct comparison for the Oud Bruin is the Red Flanders, or the Flanders Red, I should say. When you compare those two side by side, and I urge you to do this, put them side by side, the Oud Bruin is typically going to be maltier, typically going to be more in that brown spectrum, both in color and in flavor, is typically going to be a little bit stronger in ABV, and it's going to really manifest less in fresh red berries and more into dark dried fruits for the Oud Bruin. That is, again, there's so much overlap, but when you try to separate the two, that's going to be the main differences from my experience. How about some commercial examples?
Yeah, and so if you do your beer studies, no matter where you live, you're going to find your way to Leafman Brewery. This beer
Mm,
style literally goes back to Leafman's in the 1600s, where that was what put Leafman's on the mark. So look for examples from Leafman's. There's two different ones or more. I wish I could say I've toured and tasted there, and I'd love to one day. But Leafman's is a must for your calibration and what you're looking for. You're going to try for Leafman's Oud Bruin. Leafman's Gudenband is another one. Itegem Oud Bruin. You also have Petrus. Petrus comes up a lot.
oh, I love Petrus.
Yeah, Road Bruin. And then
Hmm.
Frem Old Bruin. Frem is out of the States in the Pacific Northwest and the Oregon area. They have an Old Bruin. So as we said in the beginning of this Stylecast, you're going to see these few and far between, but these are some of the commercial examples that are out there to seek out because they will help you calibrate perfectly.
Yeah, and Julia, please, I'm going to ask you to beg. I'm going to beg your pardon, because coming from Oregon, where Freem is from, they are one of those breweries that tackles a lot of different styles, and they hit them on the head almost every time. And so, if you find a big stash of Freem Oud Bruin, grab some of that and grab some other stuff. They didn't pay me to say this. I just know this as a matter of personal fact. That they do incredible stuff, but it is a weird word, and there's been a lot of debate over the years. I actually called up the brewery one day and just to hear their message, just to figure out how to pronounce it, and it's Freem.
Thank you. And that is great. I love it.
Yeah, I kind of cracked myself up, just like I need to know. Anyway, let's talk about the vital stats. This is where we can start comparing these numbers side by side, especially with Flanders Red, and just see how they stack up against each other, and just seeing how they sway. If you do have to take a test, if you do need to know these numbers, then you can see how these puzzle pieces fit next to each other. If we talk about ABV for the Oud Bruin, it's 4 to 8%. If we go back to Flanders, it's 4.5 to 6.5. So the Oud Bruin has the potential to be even stronger. Now, this is also kind of interesting. Back in our Flanders Red Stylecast, the IBUs were 10 to 25, minimal at best. The Oud Bruin is 20 to 25. So it's going to hang out on that upper end, but they're going to be neck and neck on that upper end. And so that's just where, there's just a natural variation between those two. When we talk about the color, the SRMs, we're looking at 17 to 22. That is firmly into copper to light brown territory. If we translate that to European Brewery Convention, we're at 34 to 44. And when we get into the gravities, again, the original gravity just kind of pertains to the potential for alcohol there, and there's a nice correlation between ABV and OG as long as it attenuates fully and properly. But the OG for that is going to be 1040 to 1074, not terribly strong, but elevated. And when we translate that into degrees Plato, then we're going to be at 10 to about 18 and a half. It's the final gravity that we're particularly interested in. And if 1010 is that fence where it's either below which it's dry, above which it has body, this skirts it perfectly well. We've got 10.8 to 1012. So there is some body, but it's light, refreshing, easy drinking, great for pairing. The final Plato is going to end up right around 2 to 3. And for those of you who think about the amount of alcohol in terms of Plato, we're looking at 8 to about 15 and a half. But we don't talk about this very often. Volumes of CO2 or carbonation, it's right about average, kind of about 2.5. It's not a particularly aggressive beer, but it has enough carbonation to cleanse and kind of clean up everything that's going on in that complex taste that you're getting as well. Those are the stats. Let's talk about the glassware and the temperature.
Yes, and most breweries, if you're getting beer from a Belgian brewery, they will have a specific branded glass that they want you to drink. Their example, no matter the style in. So we're hybridizing whenever we on Sense of Beer Style are telling you a specific glass that we would enjoy that style out of best. The Belgian triangle Tiku Tulip is one that comes to mind, right? It's footed stemmed, and then it almost looks like a triangle, and it has a little bump on the lip. I'm drinking not my Oud Bruin, but your typical kind of vase-like footed stemmed Belgian type of glassware is very, very pleasing. There's nucleation sites. Jeremy's showing you one at the bottom of that glass where the stem meets the inside of the glass. There's often nucleation sites that'll help coax out carbonation. So I want this in something that often has a stem and doesn't cause my hand holding the beverage to warm it up too fast. I would like these colder. I'm fine to have these right out of the fridge temperature and then let them warm up, as opposed to saying I need to drink these at cellar temperature. But I know there's certain certainly all different types of approaches. This one's just also to a beer about refreshment. As complex as this sounds, this beer, it really is about a refreshment factor. And when Jeremy's telling you that style guidelines can have it anywhere to 4 to 8% ABV or alcohol by volume, that's a big range. And the lower ABV ones, it's more about just that beautiful sip that quenches your palate and tongue and gets you ready for the next bite. So colder is good with me.
Now, my favorite part, and I love I get to go first because I can get my favorites out of the way, and I can just sit back and listen to Julia talk about her pairings. But because this beer is so complex malt driven and has this just beautiful acidity, somewhat reminiscent of balsamic vinegar, this is fantastic with something savory, something meaty, especially cooked over open fire. I am a huge fan of this beer with an Argentinian steak or an Argentinian parrillada, where it's like a grill that goes on your table full of just different meats that are still with the grill still smoking. This is a beer that the Belgians will use to make and to pair with carbonade flamande, which basically like a Belgian stew. So again, it's just going with this meat, rich and smoky, savory dish with this beer. And then at the end of the night, I want to drink this with a kind of a dark chocolate with some dried fruit in there. This beer takes that dried fruit that's in that dark chocolate, already complex dark chocolate with a complex beer, and it kind of breathes life back into that dried fruit that's in that chocolate bar. And it's just beautiful. I urge you all to try it. Julia, what are yours?
Well done. Home runned it. Wow. Unless you're not a carnivore, but you took us to the dessert style
Well,
too. And I love
I
that.
am, so I'm biased.
Yes, and that just is the nature of an eclectic audience, but always ode to those that are certainly not eating meat. I would say that it's funny because my mind wants to go to the fruited versions of these beers, right? And that's a totally different style. So
Yeah.
you all have been listening. You made it this far. We're at Beer Judge Certification Program Style Guidelines 2021. And we are in the European sour ale category, right? But if you bump over to 29A, you get to the fruit beer version of these. And so adding those raspberries, those cherries, and the like. And then the pairing is even more simple and easy. These beers are very delicate yet complex. When they're not fruited, you're not going to get that dominance of the fruit taste that also marries with the malt. You're just going to really be looking to pair it and use the beer as a refreshment factor. And I think everything Jeremy talked about with the proteins he mentioned, it's really going to go well with the spicing, dry rubs on certain things, right? I really like that. I would say play around with this. I commonly do pair Flanders Red, and that's a different style, but I would also put Oud Bruin in the lentil soup. I do a great version of that. Listen to our Flanders Red episode. I even read a chapter from my beer pairing book. But this beer is going to, I think, because it's got that vinegary taste, right? That acetobacter, and those dark malt notes, it's going to marry very well with things that are spiced, right? And the Belgian yeast has its own spicing. So I think that this beer, as you sip next to your food as the sauce, right? It's almost like the sauce on the food, and then you take a bite of the food, and then that beverage in your mouth, the Oud Bruin, is the sauce to that food. And so I would use it with anything that you want to try it with. Everything from grilled sweet potatoes sounds lovely, right? To let's try charred. I don't want to go to tofu because I'm trying to balance out all the meat you said. But I like the idea of char with this, right? This
How
beer
about
would
like a grilled portobello mushroom to keep
yes,
that savoriness?
absolutely. And then you've got some umami in the
Yeah.
mushroom for sure. Good job there, Jeremy. And I could see drizzling a little soy sauce or even stir fry sauce on top of that portobello mushroom. And then this beer with its aged nature, umami, talking to umami, could be
Yeah.
very, very pleasing.
No, and I'll be honest, this is not the beer that you're likely to bring out on a summer barbecue and pour into a red party cup and say, hey man, I just pulled this out of the cooler. You want to try this? This is a beer that's I don't want to sound crass, but this is not an entry level beer. I know a lot of people that don't like these kinds of beers because they quote unquote don't like sours. This is something that takes some time to appreciate, some time to understand, some time to just truly fall in love with. I had my moment where the clouds parted and the angels sang, and I've been in love with this ever since. And I know that's not going to be true for everyone, but please try this beer. Please understand that there's more to it than just being a beer. It really is special, and it deserves a little bit of attention to at least come to appreciate what it truly is.
I like that. And I'll kind of tie it all up in a tidy bow and say that there's more to, when you want to prove there's more to beer than your standard American lager or what you're used to drinking, your American IPA or whatever, or your international lager. This is an example of what beer can take you to. There's much more to beer when you drink an Oud Bruin, and it proves it. It proves it very, very well.
Yeah. So go find one and enjoy. Cheers.
Cheers.
Thank you for listening to A Sense of Beer Style, the essential beer style training for those who want to lead in food and beverage. With advanced Cicerones, me, Julia,
and me, Jeremy.
Tune into the next episode as we continue exploring the world of beer styles and what to make of them. We encourage you to listen to the prepisodes to build your foundation and better understand beer styles.
And before the next episode, I'd like to ask you to review the show and let us know what you'd like featured in upcoming episodes. Until next time, here's to you and your sense of beer style. Thank you for listening. Cheers.